Now, a civil servants union says it is highly unlikely that the Foreign Secretary was incorrectly briefed about the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British woman who is imprisoned in Iran. It comes after newspaper reports that mistakes were made in preparing Boris Johnson for questions from a committee of MPs. Well, the General Secretary of the FDA union, Dave Penman, said in a statement, "It's difficult to imagine such a mistake being made by an FCO official, but even if it were, the buck stops with the Foreign Secretary. It's his responsibility to correct any mistakes, not vaguely pointing the finger and looking for someone to blame. It's very disappointing that these accusations are being thrown around, safe in the knowledge that civil servants are unable to defend themselves or respond." Mr. Penman joins us now live from East Tilbury in Essex. Mr. Penman, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to begin our conversation by saying that sources close to the Foreign Secretary have told Sky News that it is categorically not the case that Mr. Johnson is seeking to blame Foreign Office officials or their briefing for his comments regarding Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in front of that committee. Dave Penman, what do you say to these accusations, these reports that the Foreign Secretary said that it was this briefing that he got these comments from?
Well, first of all, if the Foreign Secretary is correcting that statement that's been said in his name, that's welcome. It's disappointing that once again it is sources close to the Foreign Secretary correcting allies of the Foreign Secretary, and I think this is a pattern of behaviour from some politicians around these sorts of issues where they don't have the courage to come out and make statements for themselves. As I said earlier on today, it would be astonishing if officials at the FCO were to make such a mistake. I don't know whether they did or didn't, but precise language is critical to diplomacy, and so it would be highly unusual in a prepared statement and briefing that such a mistake would be made. But the difficulty here is when accusations are thrown at civil servants, they are not able to defend themselves, and those who throw those accusations know that.
Well, talk us through how this could have happened. And I have to reiterate that the sources close to the Foreign Secretary have told Sky News it's categorically not the case that Mr. Johnson is seeking to blame FCO officials. But when a Foreign Secretary is going to sit in front of a committee, as Mr. Johnson did, how do they go about briefing the Foreign Secretary, these FCO officials? Where do they get their information? I mean, how can you say categorically that this sort of a mistake wouldn't have happened?
I can't say categorically I wasn't there, I didn't see the briefing. What I'm saying is it would be very surprising because precise language is critical to diplomacy. So if there's a written brief, if the Foreign Secretary has been briefed for an appearance before a select committee, they will be talking him through that briefing. There will be a written briefing for him to read as well. And therefore, if you're preparing that sort of document, it's not the sort of thing that's a slip of the tongue. You would be very careful in the sort of language that you would use. But whether an official made that mistake or not, the important point here is to correct it. The important issue here is not pointing fingers at who was at fault. It's correcting the record and trying to bring this woman home and reunite her with her family.
So what do you think Boris Johnson should be doing now?
Well, it's a matter for the Foreign Secretary. In terms of this issue, I think he has to correct the statement. I think it's important that when politicians find themselves in a position where allies or friends close to them make these sorts of statements, they come out on the record and correct them. If they stand by and allow these sorts of accusations to be thrown around in their name and don't correct them, then in my view, they are liable for those accusations.
You say that diplomacy is all about precise language. When you heard these comments by Boris Johnson, what did you think?
It's not for me to judge. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a trade union general secretary and I represent diplomats. It's not for me to judge the Foreign Secretary's comments in relation to this. What I am saying is that the Foreign Secretary has a duty, if he thinks the record is wrong, to correct it, but also to ensure that the finger is not pointed at diplomats in relation to this. What's important here is correcting the record, getting this woman home, not finger pointing who's to blame.
So did you think even if it was a case where there was a briefing, a mistake was made, do you think the Foreign Secretary should be able to count 100% in the information that he's given. He shouldn't have to then go and fact check the information that his people are giving him, don't you think?
Of course that's the case. Any minister has to be able to rely on the advice and information they're given from civil servants. But let's be clear here, actually the Foreign Secretary has not said this. It's sources close to him who have said this, that the fault here lies with civil servants rather than with the Foreign Secretary himself, which is why it's absolutely critical that the Foreign Secretary goes on the record here and says clearly that it was not about a briefing from civil servants. If he allows those people close to him to make those sorts of accusations and sit silent, then effectively he is endorsing them.
Dave Penman, the FDA General Secretary, thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.